They say she walked barefoot into the court of Luanda. Not because she lacked shoes, but because she wanted the Portuguese to hear her coming. Queen Nzinga. Or as they whispered behind closed doors, the woman who speaks like iron. She was already a queen when the story begins. Not by birth. Her brother had ruled before her, driven half-mad by colonial wars, Portuguese betrayal, and the ghosts of his own cowardice. But when he died, some say by her hand, Nzinga took the throne of Ndongo with a calmness that frightened even her own generals. Not because she was violent, but because she was patient. And patience is more terrifying than rage. When she was first summoned by the Portuguese governor in 1622, she knew they'd offer her nothing. So she brought gifts anyway, bolts of silk, spices, slaves. She arrived dressed like a European diplomat, wrapped in crimson cloth, her headdress like a crown of coiled serpents. The governor's men offered her no chair, only a mat on the ground, a sign of submission. So Nzinga turned to one of her servants, pointed, and without a word, he knelt. She sat on his back as if it were a throne. That's how she began. But diplomacy was just the first blade. The second was war. And Nzinga was not interested in dying nobly. She would outlive them. Outlive the missionaries, the slavers, the kings, the priests. She would write her name in the blood-soaked clay of Central Africa, and force Europe to pronounce it. And for that she would need more than warriors. She would need fear. In her royal compound she built a court unlike any in Africa. Her guards were women. Trained with blades, dressed in armor, they moved silently. No man could enter her presence armed. And the men who did enter, the ones she allowed into her bed, never left alive. She called them her husbands, but they were not chosen for love. They were chosen for spectacle. Each month she held a contest. Her male concubines, dozens of them, some captured in war, some born into bondage, would be forced to fight each other to the death. The winner would earn one night with the queen. And in the morning he would be killed. But not just killed. Ritually executed. His body burned, his ashes scattered into the river like an offering to the ancestors. No man would ever leave her with knowledge of her. No man would claim her as his. Nzinga belonged to no one. They feared her. But they followed her. Because she didn't just survive against the Portuguese, she embarrassed them. She used Jesuit priests as messengers. She played the Dutch against the Portuguese, offering both sides treaties she never intended to honor. She made alliances with other African kingdoms, promising gold and soldiers and trade, and when they resisted, she crushed them. Her army struck at night. They burned forts to the ground, slit the throats of colonial governors, freed the slaves shackled to Portuguese outposts and marched them into her army. Her war wasn't just political. It was personal. Her own sisters had been taken. Her people were being sold across oceans. And still they called her savage. She responded by building a kingdom where no woman could be sold. Where Portuguese tongues were cut out for lying. Where Catholic crosses stood beside ancestral shrines, and where her own face, carved from blackwood, was raised above every altar. She reigned with ritual. When she appeared in court, she was painted from head to toe in red ochre. Her body glistened with oil, her neck heavy with golden rings. She spoke in proverbs. She never laughed. And when a foreign envoy dared to touch her, a gesture of goodwill, he claimed, she had his fingers removed and sent back to his king in a velvet box. She ruled like no one had ruled before. And yet they tried to erase her. Portuguese scribes called her mad. Priests condemned her as a demoness. Some claimed she drank the blood of children. Others whispered she had no soul. But Nzinga knew the truth. Men call which what they cannot dominate. Her power was not a myth. It was built in real things, alliances, steel, terror. She had transformed a scattered people into a united kingdom. She had turned slave caravans into armies. She had made herself untouchable. But power comes at a cost. Inside her palace there were no mirrors. Not because she feared her face, but because mirrors invite reflection. And Nzinga had no time for that. Her sister, Kifunji, had once begged her to stop the executions. Let at least one of them live, she said. Let one man stay. Nzinga said nothing. The next morning, Kifunji was found kneeling in the queen's chambers. Her mouth sewn shut with golden thread. The message was clear. Speak against the queen, and lose your voice. Yet there were moments, quiet ones. Late in the night, when the fires burned low, when the guards stood motionless like statues, when the royal court was asleep. In those moments, Nzinga would walk alone to the edge of the river. She would kneel. She would speak to the ancestors, not in words but in breath. And in the silence, it is said, she would weep. Not out of sorrow, but because even queens must pay for the lives they take. They say the fire pit never went cold. In the center of her compound, beneath the stars, beneath the beating drums, beneath the eyes of every spy and soldier, Queen Nzinga kept a flame alive. Day and night. Rain or dry season. It burned for her ancestors, yes, but also for her enemies. Because Nzinga understood something the Portuguese never did. Fear was not a tool. It was a currency. And every month she made them pay. The men who fought for her weren't warriors in the usual sense. Some were captured soldiers from rival tribes. Others were former slaves from European caravans. Others still had begged for the privilege. Men seduced by the legend, men who thought they could survive what others had not. Men who thought her love was worth the cost. They were brought out at dusk. Stripped of rank, stripped of names. Painted in war ash and led into the blood pit, a ring of red earth enclosed by the walls of her palace, surrounded by the queen's all-female guard, each holding blades sharper than bone. The rules were simple: fight until one remained. The winner would be brought before the queen. Federal dressed in silk and gold. And when night fell, he would enter her chambers, a cavern of scented oils, veils of ivory linen, floors made of lion hide. There, he would find her seated beneath a tree carved from black iron, her crown of feathers casting long shadows over her face. She never spoke during the ritual. She only watched. Watched him undress. Watched him approach. Watched him believe, for just a few hours, that he had been chosen. But by sunrise he'd be dead. Some were strangled in their sleep. Others poisoned with wine laced in oleander. One tried to flee. They found him knee-deep in the river, sobbing, before the guards dragged him back and slit his throat over the fire pit. They called it madness. The Europeans, the missionaries, even some of her own allies. But it wasn't madness. It was design. Nzinga was sending a message. No man would possess her. No body would soften her. No love would weaken her walls. And as for the men who dared to want her, she would bury them beneath her name. But not all battles were fought in rings of blood. By the mid-1600s, the Portuguese had begun to bleed. Slowly but surely, their forts crumbled. Their allies wavered. And in Luanda, whispers began to spread, that the woman from the highlands, the Black Queen with death in her bed, might actually win. So they changed tactics. They sent priests. Jesuit missionaries disguised as diplomats, men of the cloth offering peace in exchange for obedience. They promised her titles, trade, even forgiveness for her sins. Nzinga accepted their offer. She rode to Luanda under a banner of white linen. Her convoy stretched for miles. Warriors on horseback, slaves carrying baskets of fruit, singers chanting her praises. And when she entered the cathedral, she knelt, not before the cross but before the eyes of the governor. He offered her communion. She took it. But inside she laughed. Because while the Portuguese believed they were converting her, Nzinga was learning their ways. Their diplomacy. Their greed. Their obsession with ceremony and documents and signatures. She turned it all into armor. And then she returned to the forest and prepared for her final war. They tried to kill her, of course. One of her most trusted advisors was bribed. A boy she had raised, a cousin, perhaps even a lover. He brought poison into her tent hidden in a cup of palm wine. But she saw it in his eyes. She waited until he drank first. He died in silence. She left his body in the forest for the leopards. From that day on she ate only what she gathered. Slept in a different room each night. Spoke her orders through 3 layers of messengers. She was no longer queen by blood or ritual, she was queen by myth. And the myth could not be touched. The old generals called her cruel. She didn't care. One of them dared to raise his voice during council, told her the executions were excessive, that the blood games were turning the people restless. That the kingdom was held by fear, not love. She did not respond. She only walked to him, placed her hand on his chest and asked, "Is this the heart of a lion? Or a man begging to die slow?" The next morning his head was found on a pike. No one asked again. But power isolates. And even Nzinga, the untouchable, the death queen, the woman with fire in her eyes, began to feel the cost. Her sisters were gone. Kifunji, whose voice had once filled the royal court with laughter, now lay buried under a tree of silence. Her army had grown restless, swollen with foreign mercenaries and tribes with old grudges. And the world outside, the world of ships and gunpowder and printed Bibles, was changing. They were coming. Not just Portuguese now, but Dutch merchants, Spanish missionaries, British slavers. The jungle could not hold them forever. Not when she had survived this long by feeding the world only the reflection she wanted them to see. And what they saw was legend. They saw a queen wrapped in leopard skins, not silks. A woman who painted her lips in blood before battle, who rode bareback into the jungle with blades strapped to her thighs. They saw her atop a black horse at dawn, her spear pointed not at men, but at history itself. They called her many things: witch, demon, goddess, seductress, rebel. But the name they whispered the most was immortal. And Nzinga made sure they believed it. Even as her bones ached. Even as her nights grew quieter. Even as the fire in the pit began to die a little faster each morning. But she would not let time win. So she created a new ritual. Each month, a man would still be chosen, one survivor of the arena. But now they would not die the next morning. Now they would be given a choice. Bend the knee, and live as her slave. Stand tall, and die with honor. She thought they would break. Most did. But one, just one, looked her in the eye, smiled and said, "I was dead the moment I walked in." She let him kiss her. Then slit his throat on her lap. Didn't even blink. Because to be Queen Nzinga was to live in contradiction. She loved her people, but killed them for disobedience. She fought for freedom, but ruled with fear. She slept beside men, but trusted only women. And that contradiction was her weapon. It confused the Europeans. It shattered the minds of foreign generals. They never knew if she would meet them in a church or a battlefield. Whether she would toast them with wine or poison. Whether she would come as a bride or a butcher. In 1657, after decades of war, the Portuguese finally bowed. They signed a treaty. A real one. With real respect. Recognizing her rule over Ndongo and Matamba. They even called her queen in their letters, a word they had once refused to say. It was her greatest victory. But it was lonely. She stood atop the walls of her capital that night, the wind twisting through her hair, the jungle below hissing with crickets and ghosts. Behind her were palaces built from stone and gold. Inside, hundreds of servants awaited her command. And yet, she whispered the names of the men she'd killed. One by one. Not with regret, but with ritual. She honored them the only way she knew how, by remembering. Because in her world, memory was sacred. And if no one remembered your name, your death meant nothing. Nzinga ruled until the age of 80. They say she never took a husband. Never bore a child. But she raised armies. Burned empires. Played Europe like a drum. And in her final days, when the fires of her palace had turned from red to ash, she summoned her council and gave them one final command. Tell the story right. Because she knew how the world would twist her. How men would try to make her soft. How colonizers would try to make her savage. How time would try to sand down the teeth of her legend. She would not allow it. So she ordered her life to be recorded in the old tongue. Not in Portuguese. Not in Latin. But in Bundu, her mother's language. The tongue of the forest. Of rebellion. Of blood. And then she lay down on a bed of spears, wrapped herself in the skin of a panther, and went still. Her body was buried in a hidden grove, guarded by 100 women with blades. Her tomb has never been found. But the legend remains. The queen who made warriors fight for her bed, and killed the winner. The woman who stood against Europe, not once but again and again. Who kissed death and called it mercy. Who never blinked when blood was spilled. To some, she was cruel. To others, divine. But to the land she ruled, she was the storm. And long after her bones turned to dust, mothers would whisper her name to their daughters like a warning.